All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Claire Laughlin. So good to be with you today. And Theresa, say hello to everybody.
Hello, everyone. I'm Theresa Phillips, and so happy that you are here today.
Awesome. So Theresa and I are here today to talk about performance improvement plans and proper documentation. This is such a sore spot for so many people. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you, Theresa. Tell us, just before we get started, just
Mhm.
give us some background, because I know people want to know a little bit about you and kind of how you got into this whole world of performance improvement and knowing how to properly document things.
Sure. Thank you, Claire. Well, I've been in the HR world for 25 years, and 20 of those years have included being an HR employee relations consultant.
Oh,
And
wow.
of course, I have the pleasure of working with you today. I also want to say the topic of performance improvement plans and proper documentation is near and dear to me because I've worked with hundreds of managers,
Yeah.
and proper documentation is the make or break in determining whether or not a manager can move forward with further disciplinary action.
Yeah.
So performance ultimately determines the longevity of how
Yeah.
long an employee will be in a company, and having the proper documentation and moving along with, coaching, feedback, and documentation is critical. And
Oh
we'll
my
talk
gosh.
about that today.
Absolutely. And I'm super excited about this because it is such a pain point for people. And we know, you and I have talked about so many stories about people who are like, they want to, they want to, coach a person either in or out of the organization.
Hmm.
But then when you go back and you look at, say, their performance appraisal, so let's just say somebody's performance is suffering, we usually hear from them after they're really frustrated and they're just feeling done. And like, I want this person out of the organization, right? And then
Right.
you say, well, let me see, let me take a look at your performance evals. And they go back and they're all raving, wonderful performance evaluations, no documentation whatsoever about, about the coaching or the agreements people have made, right?
Hmm.
And that just sets that poor manager up for a long, hard road ahead.
It really does, Claire. It's so important to have that documentation, having those conversations the moment that the performance starts to, slip, or the manager's getting feedback from team members that this person's not performing, or the manager observes it directly.
Yeah.
Not having that conversation, not documenting, and causes a host of problems, and is a huge, as you said, pain point for managers, because if the documentation is not there, guess what? They have to start at square one, and that
Right.
adds to the manager's frustration. So we're going to
Absolutely.
talk about how to lessen that frustration and how to start when and what to document.
Excellent. I mean, again, I know a lot of people resist this idea of documenting their conversations for a lot of reasons.
Hmm.
One is because when nothing is going wrong, it feels like a suspicious activity. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like, oh, I've got to document things. And it can actually even come off that way, where some people are like, why do you have to write down everything we talk about? And so we're not actually recommending writing down everything, right?
That's correct. We're not recommending writing down everything. And hopefully the manager has had an ongoing relationship with their employee where they meet with them regularly one-on-one to talk
Right.
about what the employee's aspirations are. How are things going? Do you need any
Yes.
assistance from me? Those kind of things that the
Right.
manager would have had that relationship developed already. It's much easier. And the manager will know what's going on, so that if there are some issues that come up, the
Yeah.
manager can do a course correction and counsel and coach,
Right.
I should say, coach the employee early on.
Right, absolutely. So I know we're going to talk about that context as well. So let me just pull up a couple of slides. We're just going to walk through a few little things here. And okay, here we are, performance
Okay.
improvement plans. And
Okay.
today, this is what our plan is. We're going to take that big picture look at the performance process, right? So
Yes.
I love that, because you just mentioned coaching, and I want to contextualize this within a manager's regular interaction with their employee, right?
Mhm.
We want to support performance all the time. We
Mhm.
want to support people being able to perform at their peak. So that's really
Mhm.
important. So we'll take that big picture look. We'll understand that point. And this is what I love about the way you approach this, Theresa, but that point where that performance conversation kind of turns over into a performance improvement plan.
Mhm.
I think it's important too for us to tell people right now, like, a performance improvement plan is not doomsday,
No.
right? It's
Right.
it's
That's
support.
right.
Say, what were
It,
you going to say?
you're exactly right. It's support. The coaching conversation is to help the employee to improve.
Yeah.
A manager wants the employee to be successful because that means that they will be successful too. And most managers today are working managers. So they want to see what's going on with this employee and coach them to success.
Absolutely. So, yeah. And I think the thing is that I was just talking to somebody yesterday and they were talking all about how they started to give, they're starting to give regular feedback because they've never given regular feedback, right?
Right.
So as the managers start to give feedback and sort of try to create this culture of feedback, which by the way, they're not expecting is just going to be one way. Like, I'm just going to give you feedback and I'm never going to ask you for anything. It's not that.
No,
but as they're starting to give feedback, everybody's emotions get heightened because they're not accustomed to this, right? And so I think that's a really important thing to just acknowledge that a performance improvement plan gets a bit of a bad rap, especially in the context of we don't talk about performance and we don't give feedback. Now we're going to do a performance improvement plan. That's where it gets sticky, right?
That is true. And some employees feel like, well, why are you having this conversation with me? Why are you picking on me? Why are you treating me differently? And the manager is treating the employee differently because there are some performance issues, but we're going to talk through that as well of how to have that conversation with the employee.
Absolutely. Okay. And we're going to go over some do's and don'ts of effective documentation. I know everybody's looking forward to that because that's so important. Yeah. So let's talk about what performance is. Go for it. Tell us a little bit about this.
You know, each of us has our own journey for within our career. And when I think about the word performance, it takes me back to a time when I was new in my career. And my manager would meet with me regularly to go over my deliverables, what I'm working on, reports, so that she can understand how to coach me to meet the expectations. So that was really important for me to understand what she wanted, what she needed. And it was important for the manager to understand. I understood, what she needed as well. And that guidance along the way was really important. We also live in a world that is kind of post-pandemic. So performance may be hard to measure. Also, the manager may be even more challenged with how to best measure performance and what that looks like. And now people are returning to the workplace, and sometimes that's a hybrid model. So again, there are a lot of moving parts now and how to measure performance.
Absolutely. And I think this is okay. So today we're talking about performance improvement plans. So we will talk about that place where performance shifts, but the big context is that we all need to understand what is expected of us, right? How can I perform to standard? How can I perform well for my organization when I don't know what's expected of me? And we take so much of this for granted. So I think this issue of clarity and creating clarity about this is what we're doing together. Here's the expectations. Here's how we know if we're successful, right?
Right.
And then supporting the person to be able to perform in that way. That is really, really what we're after.
It really is, because if the manager is not clear what is expected of the employee doesn't know either. So how can the employee be held accountable, and how can the employee know what is expected of him or her if the manager isn't clear? The manager must be clear with the expectations, and not just say it. Make sure the employee can talk back to them and tell them, I understand what the expectations are. This is what I need to do, so that at the end of that meeting, they both understand and agree to what the expectations are moving forward.
Absolutely. I think that's so imperative. Okay, but this is an interesting thing because so much of performance is kind of fuzzy, right? I mean, it really is. So let's look at describing performance issues, because there's a lot that goes into it.
There's a lot that goes into it. So, in most cases, managers need to translate things like, impressions, what we see, raw data. The employee produces inaccurate reports. Also, there's input and feedback, what they hear from other team members, what they hear from other managers, what they actually see as well. Observations, the employee's not meeting the expectation or the objectives. So managers have kind of a vague kind of what's really going on here. But looking at all of these things, the inputs, the impressions, the feedback, the raw data and observations, putting that into clear, specific description of performance issues. It's
Yeah.
what's important.
Yeah.
And in a lot of jobs, performance is sometimes difficult to measure, but
Yeah.
having the job description or clear metrics is critical,
Right.
very critical.
We have to have the clear standards, right? The standards for your job, like what your output is.
Mhm.
But also, I'm always, we talk about this a lot. I'm a big fan of having standards for how the team will interact.
Yes.
I might say the team culture standards,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
So,
Yes.
for example, okay, so let's talk about impressions.
Mhm.
So, a manager has an impression. This is generally where performance issues start.
Mhm.
I'm thinking, right? A manager has
Yes.
this impression. It's like, I don't know, the person is just disengaged, or gee, this person just isn't. My impression is that they're not performing quickly enough, or
Mhm.
thoroughly enough, or this or that,
Mhm.
right? So this place where we get this impression first of like, I don't know, this person's attitude isn't right, or they just seem so negative, or
Right.
right.
Right, exactly. Or when people are in the office, the person seems like so disorganized, or I walk up to them and they're like, they have no idea what I'm talking about when they are the lead on this project, or they
Yeah.
should know about the project, or they're
Right.
late to Zoom meetings and they
Right.
just need to be tuned out,
Yeah.
or their cameras off,
Yeah.
or they don't contribute to any other conversation that they're
Right.
part of the project of. So the impression would be, I wonder how engaged this person really is.
Right.
What is really going on?
Right. So so part of what you just mentioned, that list of things you just mentioned, like I talked to the person and they can't formulate clear thoughts,
Mhm.
right? Or they're late for a Zoom meeting, or they never participate with their camera on, or this or that, right?
Yes.
So that's the impression that we're forming there. Is I'm forming this impression of a person being disengaged, but you're talking about kind of, is that raw data, or is that observation? Is that like, I've observed this?
Yes, and that would definitely be an observation. I
Okay.
observe that you're late to Zoom meetings. I've
Yeah.
observed that, you don't participate even
Yeah.
when you're called on. You don't have anything that you contribute to the piece of work that you're working on.
Yeah.
And and that observation leads me to ask you, what is going on?
Yeah.
Are you participative? Are you
Yeah.
um
Everything
uh,
okay, right?
is everything okay?
Is
Is
everything
everything
okay?
okay? Yes, absolutely. And others have this impression as well.
Yeah.
Others have observed you not participating. Others have observed you not delivering what you should be delivering. And so I need to talk with you and ask you, is everything okay? Is there anything I can help you with
Right.
to be able to perform? And that's starting to ask those questions
Yeah.
of the employee.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that for just a second.
Mhm.
I know a lot of managers get tripped up in a sense with that thing of somebody else is observing this behavior and they're telling me, your manager,
Mhm.
right? I'm gonna stop the screen just for a minute so I can see you better. Okay, so somebody else is observing this, they're sharing it with me, and now it's my job to turn that around and talk to you about it. What do
Yes.
you think about that? What do you do with that, Theresa? That's such a tricky situation.
It's very tricky because have I heard this before?
Right.
Have I
Have
observed
I
anything
observed it?
before?
Yeah.
Have I observed it? Has anyone else come to me with this issue or concern regarding the employee?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the backdrop where I start.
Yeah.
And then I ask that person who's coming forth to me, can you give me some examples of what you're seeing as far as this person being not engaged? Can you give me some examples, some specific examples that will help me so that I can have that conversation with the employee? And if it's one
Yeah.
person, I'm still going to have the conversation, but it's going to be more general.
Yeah.
If there's other people that are coming, certainly I will ask for those examples, because it's important too to give those examples to the employee so that he or she understands this is what they are experiencing from you when
Yeah.
you're not attentive and you're not
Right.
delivering your part of the project. But I do
Right.
have that conversation. And then, of course, opening it up,
Yeah.
remaining curious,
Right.
open it up to find out what's going on with the employee.
Right. So, do you ever get into that situation where the employee then pushes back and says, like, who said that? Like, I want to know who said that, or I know who said that. It must be this person or that person, right?
That's a great question, Claire, because in the back of the mind, the manager also has to kind of decipher, are there other personality, are there other things going on? Is there a rub between these two employees as well?
Yes,
So the manager has
right.
to be aware of that. And if the employee does push back, which
Yeah,
that does happen,
yeah,
I've coached the manager to say, that is confidential. It's not important who came to me with this issue or concern, but it's more important for me to talk with you to get an understanding of what is going on and to
right.
let you know that this is an impression that someone has come and talked to me about. And
Okay.
I want to talk with you because this is how this person is experiencing you at work.
Right. Okay. So that matters,
That
right?
matters.
That matters to
Mhm,
say, look, whether or not you agree with it, even whether or not I've personally experienced it,
mhm,
this is the way that others are experiencing you,
correct.
part of the way that others are experiencing you at work. And therefore, it is relevant for us to discuss, right? It's
Absolutely.
relevant for us to discuss.
Mhm,
Because I mean, in a way, you could say that this could help the person build their self-awareness
mhm,
of the impact that they make on others, right?
absolutely.
I think it's
Absolutely.
really
Yeah.
important. Yeah.
Mhm. And that person
Okay.
does need to know how others are experiencing him or her at work because it could be a blind spot and
Yeah,
it could be something that will eventually get in their way.
absolutely. Right.
Yes. Mhm,
So it's funny, but I think as you're talking about this, I'm thinking about how important it is to catch certain things early,
mhm.
right? And you don't want to be a nitpicky manager. You don't want to be calling somebody in every time, all the time, saying, well, this person said this, or I'm worried about that, right? Because it just creates a whole context of nitpickiness, right?
Absolutely. And that's when also the employee can have the impression that you're after me, you're nitpicking me. Why am I always, called and our only conversation or most of the conversation is about what
Yeah,
others are saying about me. It
right.
sets up and then it can set up that distrust that the employee may start to distrust the manager. Manager, are you trying to get rid of me? What's really going on here? So that's where the manager walks that fine line
Yeah,
of and having those regular ongoing one-on-one conversations
yeah,
is so important.
right.
So
And also,
important.
and I guess I just want to reiterate how important it is to be helpful and kind
Yes.
in these conversations
Yes.
and to
Clear.
be, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry. I was gonna say being clear, kind, and consistent
Yeah.
is what's really it's key.
Clear, kind, and consistent. Absolutely. And then the last thing I'll say about that is I just think that deciding up front what some of those measures of success are,
Hmm.
so that when somebody comes to you and it does feel nitpicky,
Hmm.
it's like maybe it's about your style of communication, but it's not about the content or your quality of work or anything
Hmm.
like this, then you might go like, okay, you know, you're okay. So here, I'll give you an example. Sorry, I'll change course here a little bit, but I was just having a conversation, a coaching conversation with somebody the other day, and they were saying, I have this manager, and the manager is getting feedback from one of their direct reports,
Hmm.
and the feedback feels more personal and like it's about style,
Hmm.
right? It's about
Hmm.
style, not so
Hmm.
much about the quality of the performance or the output or whatever, but it's about the person's style. Not like their style in a really extreme sense, because sometimes style can be pretty extreme. Like, oh,
Hmm.
your style is to yell at people and slam doors. No, that's not going to work, right?
Right, right,
but
right.
but if your style is to be a little bit more on the direct side and a little bit less on the touchy-feely side, for
Hmm.
example,
Yes.
then I always think, okay, it's kind of the responsibility of both parties to be aware
Hmm.
of those stylistic differences.
Hmm.
But I don't want to go in there and micromanage that situation. What is your thought on that, Theresa? Do you agree, or what's your thought?
I agree with that because a manager style could be, direct and, to the point and can appear to be micromanager when he or she is not. And the employee could be more introverted. They take the time to think,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
internalize, and then they speak. There is nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And so and it's important for the manager to be aware of his or her style.
Yeah.
And recognizing that their employee, the direct report, may have a different style.
Right.
And taking that into consideration. It's important, as you just said, not to nitpick, the employee, because then the employee may feel like, I don't stand a chance.
Yeah.
But understanding the manager style may be different, employee's style may be different, but talking to the person in a neutral, tone. This is what has been observed. These are the things that you do well. These are things I want to talk, coach you about, or just make you aware of.
Yeah.
Will go far, because while we may not be able to change our style of how our being external or an internal, but it's how you communicate to that person. And again, remaining open, clear, kind, consistent. An employee will, even when it's not negative, but even when it's direct feedback about how they're not performing, an employee will remember how you made them feel.
Right. Totally.
That's really the key. How did this manager make me feel? Did they demean me? Did they put me down? Or did they say, here's some things have been observed. Here's some things I've noticed. Here's some things that we need to work on. These are the expectations. Very different than putting the person down. So the manager needs to be really aware of that and not walk into that trap.
Gosh, it just keeps pointing me back to this idea of trying to identify the culture, the cultural standards, in a sense, of your team.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely. Yes.
Because without that, you just don't have the framework to come back to, right? Because all this discussion that we were just having about style, I thought to myself as we're talking, oh, it's common sense. It's not actually common sense.
Yeah.
It's not common. Yeah. Because some people think that, common sense, so to speak, around this stuff can be, oh, I just have to be really direct and hard driving. That's common sense, and then other people might say like, oh no, you've got to be, I don't know, different than that, right? And that's common sense. So it's not really that. It really comes back to, what do we want the vibe of our team to be?
Yes. Absolutely.
And what behaviors will support that?
Absolutely. I've worked in groups where the manager has guiding principles.
Yes.
And so the team has put forth a set of guiding principles that comes from the team.
Yeah.
And it's been worked on, massaged, and finished with, this is how we work as a group.
Yes.
This is our culture. These are our guiding principles. And everyone is held accountable because these guiding principles came from the team. And when new team members come in, they're indoctrinated. These are our guiding principles. This is how we get along with each other. And I've seen it work really well, Claire, because when disagreements come up or other things, the group looks at the guiding principles. Am I following them? Am I doing what I should be doing, or how I should be doing it? It has made a world of difference when that has been in place.
I love that. Absolutely. I'm a big fan of that.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Let's get back here. I want to show off some of these performance categories. So, okay. So we've talked very generally about a lot of different, how to describe these performance issues. So let's go into some of the common categories.
Sure.
All right. So what do we have here?
This is really key because when a manager may observe, as we said before, communication issues. So looking at performance issues falling into categories really helps the manager to pinpoint what they need to address. So looking at some examples of work quality or quantity, that work quality could be the employee is, when they submit reports, there's a lot of errors. That would fall under the quality. That would fall under quantity. Quantity could be the employee doesn't produce as much work as the other person. This is another category that the manager can use, and then from there can use specific examples of how they're not meeting that performance criteria.
Right.
Teamwork, how that person works with others. Do they show up for meetings on time? Do they talk with their other teammates in a respectful, collaborative way? Are they counterproductive? Do they disrupt the team when they're working together? These
Yeah.
are often ways that examples of things of how the
Right.
employee is not meeting that particular category of teamwork, and how this could be a performance issue that falls into that category.
Totally.
Flexibility. Are they unwilling to consider feedback that they receive from other
Yeah.
teammates or
Mhm.
or their manager
Yeah.
or others that approach or admit mistakes? Are they
Right.
flexible to say, I made a mistake, let me see if I can correct it?
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yes, judgment. How frequently, again, are they away from work
Mhm.
when they should be there?
Yeah.
Do they log on to the Zoom meeting? Do they participate? Do
Yeah.
they say, I'm not going to get involved?
Yeah.
That can also fall into the category of judgment or lack thereof.
Yeah.
Do they take the initiative to move the
Right.
project forward that they're working on? Or do
Yeah.
they rely on someone else, even if it's their piece of work that needs to be completed? Do they
Yeah.
take the initiative to make sure that that is done? Do they
Yeah.
take ownership? Do they take responsibility?
Totally.
Again, are they dependable? Do they show up?
Yeah.
Are they there? Are
Yeah.
they contributing?
Yeah.
And then lastly, communication. Do they communicate with their team? Maybe the project they're working on, or someone else joins the team and they're responsible to onboard that person. Are they communicating with that person? Are they communicating with the team when there are issues and problems? Or do they have a lack of communication and not communicate? So
Right.
these are performance categories that a manager can look at and say, oh, I'm going to look at this one. This is where this person needs help. This is where this person is not performing. And it makes it easier for the manager to write whatever the performance issues are based on the category.
Absolutely. Love that. So important. Yeah. I mean, I think, and it's good to have, because again, we went back to this impression. So my impression is that this person is being inflexible.
Mm-hmm.
My impression is that they're not being a team player.
Right.
You know, my impression is that they're not producing the same work quantity as somebody else, right? Or quality. So then then the manager can step back and say, okay, so now I know that that's my impression. Let me see can I be specific about my observations, right?
Right.
Am I just being reactive to this person, or do I have real specific data?
Correct.
Right.
Right.
And I think that's a really important next step. Well, let's take a look at the whole performance continuum, because I think that's a really important part of the conversation too.
And this is really where the rubber hits the road.
Yeah.
This is really where when we're going to talk about this and talk about in the very initial parts at times when you need to start having that coaching conversation. So
Right.
you'll see along the bottom where the x-axis with patterns or potential issues, and then the y-axis that starts with the documentation needed.
Yeah.
So it could be, I'm going to start with a project that we talked about earlier.
Okay.
So an employee is working with a team on a project.
Yeah.
And let's look and see what happens. So again, the employee starts to not meet deadlines.
Okay.
The manager is receiving unfavorable feedback from other members. The timeliness, the employee is not meeting timely within the quality of work, the productivity. At that point, when it either comes to the manager's attention, having that conversation. Let's talk about the project that you're on. Let's talk about what your responsibilities are. What have you done so far? Are you meeting the expectations? How is it going? Is there anything that you need from me to help you to be successful on with this project? And then listen to what the employee says. Yeah. Whatever the employee says, certainly you go back and reinforce. This is the metric. This is what I need from you on this project. Right. Do you understand? To the point where the manager, as the manager talks through and provides that coaching, making sure the employee knows and hear from the employee what the expectations are for the employee. It's not enough that the manager tells the employee what the feedback is or what they should be doing, but to make sure that the employee clearly understands and can reiterate, yes, this is the expectation. Yes, this is what I should be doing, so that the employee understands and they have the agreement that they both understand what the expectation is. Yeah.
Okay, so setting up those parameters, again, we're going to say this till the cows come home, but setting up those parameters and trying to establish clear expectations from the beginning.
Correct.
And I think one of the things we talk about so much in some of our team leadership classes and our coaching classes and everything else is even approaching the whole team as you're getting started with a project and having the team determine what our measures of success are going to be on this. How will we know that this project is successful? Well, we'll communicate clearly with each other. We'll deliver deadlines on time. We'll proactively raise issues as they arise. We'll please the customer. We'll have communication loops in there that help us stay on track, et cetera, et cetera. So I love the idea of starting the project with what I call it learning loops. I always say, like, let's set up our learning loops. Let's figure out what our metrics are that we're going to be measuring ourselves against. And then let's build in times to evaluate ourselves. Right?
Absolutely.
So it takes some of the burden off the manager. It takes a little bit of the burden off the manager, puts the burden on the team where it should be, right? I feel like the team, ultimately, what we're trying to build here are high performing teams. Teams that come together, they determine how they're going to act together, they determine what they're going to do together, they set out to do it, and they monitor and kind of engage themselves all along the way. Like, wouldn't that be ideal?
Ideal. And that's really, you're absolutely describing what a high performance work team is that they are in this together. You call it learning loops. I refer to it sometimes as operating principles, but working together as a team, cohesive, moving forward. They depend on each other. They rely on each other. They trust each other. They check in with each other and make sure everyone is where they should be.
So if we set up those expectations at the beginning, right? And I'm always a big advocate of setting up quick check-in points. Don't wait till the end of the project to evaluate how you did. Evaluate the second week and the third week, whatever, before even the first milestone, you figure out, like, how are we doing with all this? Are people communicating? Where are we getting stuck, et cetera? But let's just say that's kind of the ideal world. And that's what we often, we advocate for that. And we try to get all of our team leadership stuff is all about that. But there's still those cases where you're working with an individual employee, or you're saying, okay, this is the expectation for the job. And then they start performing. And so we're right here, right? We're at coaching and counseling.
Right.
And we're at, like, okay, so how's it going? Like, how can I support you? How can we continue to have success? Here's a few things that we could adjust as we go, right?
Right.
And I noticed that documentation needed, right? We still have some documentation needed. Is this, I'm thinking that this could be maybe the team charter or the project charter could be some documentation here, right? Right from the beginning.
Absolutely. And the manager can have just some manager notes. An email the manager writes to himself, or some notes in just some notes to the manager, a note to self of the conversation, what's going on, what happened, what was the outcome and expectation. Absolutely.
So you set up your expectations, you start performing, you check in, you try to make adjustments, et cetera. But then we're kind of moving up the scale here, and we realize, okay, so there is this person on the team who's falling kind of under the curve here rather consistently. Right. Is that that's kind of where we are here?
Yes, that there's a clear need for improvement seen. Again, falling under the radar, not working and producing as the other team members are, and not making and not contributing, missing deadlines, those kinds of things.
And these are patterns. At this point, these are patterns.
Exactly.
If it happens once, I go in, we talk about it, we adjust, we give support, lots of that. But now suddenly it's like, okay, I've done that a couple times. Now I'm seeing a pattern.
Exactly.
Okay.
This is now, we're seeing a pattern of behavior that something's off. Maybe there was a slight improvement, but now we're right back where we were before. And it's continuing down the slippery slope.
Okay.
So now where are we? There's a clear need to improvement seen.
Okay. So a clear need for improvement. Got it.
Clear need to improve. And at that point, I would say, again, documentation being clear, meeting with the employee, going over
Yeah.
expectations. Is there anything you need from me to be able to be successful? And then making sure the employee understands what they need to do. If there's an agreement, not the manager is thinking that he understands or she
Right.
understands what the employee is saying, but making sure the employee repeats back to the manager what is the expectation.
Right.
I also say at this point, I recommend bringing in HR. Just
Okay.
bringing in HR and then letting HR know this is what's happened. This is
Yeah.
an initial conversation I've had. This is a second conversation I had because the performance continues to slip and slide. I want to put you in the loop, put you on the radar. Yeah.
So not necessarily bringing an HR rep into the physical meeting, but you're just saying, let them know, I'm just clarifying, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Just to make them aware.
Yeah.
Just to make them aware in case the performance doesn't improve.
Yeah.
HR may have another additional recommendation, and just making sure the manager is having those conversations and documenting, just getting HR in the loop.
Great. And plus that might be a place where HR can give you some support and guidance,
Exactly.
especially if you're a new manager or this is a sticky situation or something. They may want to just advise a little bit there. Okay.
Yes.
So
agree. Especially if it's a new manager, because it's challenging. Most managers are working managers, and most new managers, haven't had this experience. Even if they've seen other managers manage performance, it's different when you're managing yourself.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I want to go back and just kind of accentuate one thing that you were saying, which is to have the employee repeat back what they understand the agreements to be, right? I always say it's so funny when you say to somebody, okay, are we on the same page? And they go, yeah. And then it's not till quite a bit later until you realize, no, actually we weren't on the same page, right? So instead of doing it that way, maybe saying, hey, humor me. Can you just I want you to repeat back to me in your own words or whatever. Tell me what you think we're agreeing to here. I want to make sure we're on the same page. Tell me what you think we're agreeing to here, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. And I would even say, I recommend sending out a quick email to the employee.
This is what we talked about.
This is what we talked about. This is what we agreed to.
Yeah. And
capturing that.
Okay.
Yes.
I think it's, again, there's always those low trust situations where every part of this continuum gets prickly because there's no trust. Right. But if you've done a good job of building trust on your team and you're showing up and you're trying to provide clarity and support and stuff like that, this is still a little uncomfortable, but it doesn't have to be awful, right? That we are in it to support a person and to turn this thing around and to keep them performing well and to keep them happy. And I mean, I don't know, Theresa, I always go to this place where I really believe that people want to perform.
I agree with you, Claire.
Right?
People do want to perform. And I come from a place that managers want their employees to be successful.
Totally.
It helps them be successful,
yeah.
But managers want their employees to be successful.
Yeah.
And that's the place that I have seen from working with many, many managers. That's what they want. Yeah. And again, I just want to say, performance management, as we cross over the gold bar here, is not an exit strategy. It's not. Right. It's to help the employee turn their performance around.
Yes.
And it's a time investment for the manager. It's also a time investment for the employee, but it's a time investment for the manager. Yeah. And while there are pain points to it, documentation, following up, following through will give the employee every opportunity to turn their performance around.
Right. Okay, so here, the coaching and counseling is not achieving the desired results. You're getting a little bit more specific about your documentation. You're probably calling in HR for some guidance. And then you've had this conversation. Now you've had this hard conversation and the performance continues to decline or just simply doesn't improve in the way that you've agreed upon.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
So at some point, we need to decide as managers, okay, we're going down that path. Right?
Right.
And would you say that what is your thought on that? Is it better to do that like sooner I would think that once you have that performance conversation, that hard performance conversation, where
Mhm.
you're not at a performance warning yet, but
Mhm.
you've been like, look, I got to be direct with you.
Yeah.
If this doesn't turn around, and you have to be specific about time, right? You have to say, if this
Mhm.
doesn't turn around by this time, or the next time we have this kind of an interaction or something like that, like you got to be specific about when,
Absolutely.
not just like in general, like, I hope this gets better or this
Right.
better get better, right? But
Right.
we are looking at specifics here,
That is correct, Claire. We're
right?
looking at specific dates as by this date, this needs to be accomplished. By this date, this needs to be accomplished.
Okay. So,
Very specific times.
okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you cross that date,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Now what happens?
Then what happens, definitely, I would absolutely recommend, if you haven't already, to just engage HR to
Okay.
make sure that
Yeah.
you're following what your agency or your
Okay.
company guidelines or policies are around
Okay.
moving through the performance management or performance discipline process.
Okay.
So whatever that is, it could be a performance warning at that point.
Okay.
It could be a performance improvement plan. It could be, some companies have a letter of concern or an expectation letter. Whatever it is, follow your agency's guide for the documented performance issue.
Okay.
And I'm calling it performance warning in this case.
Yeah.
And this is when, again, progress or improvements not sufficient. They did not meet the deadlines.
Yeah.
You've had the conversation. The
Yeah.
employee acknowledges what was expected. There has been, an email, trail that this is what's expected. The employee has agreed, yes, this is what's needed, but
Yeah.
there's not sufficient or sustained improvement. Then you
Okay.
move through the performance warning.
Okay. So I love that what you just said. I just want to kind of echo that. Not sufficient or sustained improvement.
Mhm.
Not sufficient or sustained. So
Mhm.
I improved once. I turned on my camera and I participated in a meeting once, and then the very next time I appeared to be absent again, right? That kind of
Right.
thing. Okay, it's not
Yes, that's right.
sustained improvement. So
Correct.
once is not enough. And I think what really getting this impression that the manager needs to be very attuned to what's going on right now,
Mhm.
right? They need to
Yes.
kind of focus in and be looking for improvement, or looking for signs of not sustained improvement or not sufficient improvement. And I think this is really interesting because in so much of what we teach about perception and kind of what you see is what you get type, what you think you're going to see is what you see, or something, that kind of thing.
Right.
So I think it's really important for the manager to be very conscientious of that. But that's why they need to be so specific about what it is that we're looking for, right? And the timeliness of it.
Absolutely. A manager's never at a disadvantage when they've documented.
Okay.
And also asking the employee is, again, at the end of every conversation, is there anything you need from me
Yeah.
to help you to be successful?
Okay.
Anything you need from me to help you to be successful? And always have that as your close, because there could be something that does come up that the manager's not aware of.
Absolutely.
And that could be a different issue. But if there's not, then the employee has to perform. They have to perform and meet the expectations. It has to be improved and substantial.
Yes. Okay. So then we go to this performance warning, which, just like you just said, these are words that kind of describe whatever your protocol is, or your process or policy in your workplace. So that could be called the performance warning, could be called the performance improvement plan. It could be called the letter of concern. But this is where this gold bar is where, like, okay, HR is involved, and now I'm in that track, and I'm following along with the prescribed steps of performance improvement.
That is correct.
Okay.
That is correct. And the next point, as you just said, then going up the bar, is the probation letter. This is again, documenting where the employee has not met their performance expectations, it's not been sustained, and that they're going, and then their date when the manager is going to check in again. I'm going to check in on such and such a date to make sure you have achieved these deliverables.
Yes.
Because it can lead to further disciplinary action up to and including termination. That's typically in the probation letter. So it's no surprise to the employee if you don't meet these expectations. The next step, could be termination.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And at that point, I also recommend certainly HR would be involved,
Yeah.
and perhaps sometimes legal is involved at this point,
Yeah.
because what are the risks? Have
Yeah.
you documented? Where's your documentation? Have you been clear? And
Mhm.
so these are things that legal is going to be looking at, because again, this documentation is so important. It protects the employee.
Yeah.
It also protects the company. So
Yeah.
making sure everything is clear, everything is documented before
Yeah.
you continue to move forward, once you're on the other side of this gold bar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm,
So again, this is a lot of work for the
mhm,
manager. I think it's one reason that a lot of managers don't want to go there.
mhm, mhm.
And in fact, I mean, you tell me your impressions on this, Theresa, but I think sometimes people avoid all of this area down here, this coaching and counseling, they because they know how much work this is up here and they're trying to avoid it all. But
Mhm.
unfortunately, if they're not doing this, they're actually more likely to have to do this eventually. Don't, I
Yes,
mean, maybe not, but, or it's either more likely to have to do this stuff up here, or they're just going to suffer with poor performance.
yeah, I agree, Claire. I have seen it, unfortunately, more times than I would care to, where the manager is a working manager, or they don't want to.
Yeah,
This is performance management is tough. It's difficult.
it's hard.
It's time consuming. It's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. There's extra work, a lot of extra
Yeah.
work on the manager. So sometimes the manager says, I'm just going to let this person coach. I'll do part of the work that the employee should be doing. These are all bad reasons,
Yeah.
because eventually the manager will have to deal with the performance for a number of reasons. One is because the employee is not meeting expectations.
Yeah.
And also there are other employees that are watching this manager
Yeah.
to see what the manager is going to do.
Yeah.
And the downside, if the performance is not addressed, the
Yeah.
manager will start to lose their strong employees, the ones that are working strong, because they
Yes.
said to themselves, why should I do anything when the manager's not taking care of someone who's not pulling their weight? And
Absolutely.
they lose their strongest performers, leave the organization. And then,
That is so tragic. They
yes,
either leave, or the issues of fairness all arise and they check out. They either leave or they disengage, right? They either leave
correct.
actually physically or they leave emotionally
That's
to
right.
some degree.
That's right. That's
I
right. They
know.
stop working. They stop. Some of the stronger performers say, I'm not going to put in all these hours and all this work when it doesn't matter, because my colleague is doing little to nothing.
Right.
And
All
so
fine.
this person's still being rewarded. So why should I do that? So
Right.
it's a very dangerous thing when a manager does not address the performance.
Well, not only that, but I always say, the leader's credibility suffers.
Absolutely.
People start wondering, like, why is this person not stepping up and taking care of us, right? In a sense.
Absolutely, Claire. I could have a banner that says your credibility is at stake when you don't deal with these performance issues.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the leaders start to see that, if they get understanding of what's going on, leaders
Yeah.
will say, well, I put you in this position. You are a manager. This is part of the role of a manager, is to
Yeah.
manage performance.
Right.
Yeah.
So I also think that this whole process, obviously it just, how long will it take? It depends, right? It depends on so many factors.
It depends. Yeah.
But I've heard a lot of HR professionals saying, look, once you really decide that you're going this route, it could be 6 months to a year before termination happens. Does that ring true to you, or is it just too variable to say?
I think it's a little bit too variable to say. Most of the time, what I have seen is anywhere from 30 to 90 days.
Oh,
Usually.
wow.
It could be as soon as 30 days, depending on how much documentation the manager has. Well, 30 days might be a little soon, but I would say anywhere from 60 to 90 days is usually what I have seen as a average of a range, And
Well,
that's
actually, that's much better than what I had thought about. And I think that bodes to, like, this idea that the manager really does say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to document this, and I'm going to stay on top of this, and we're going to handle this one way or another. Because I always think about that, and I think, oh my gosh, if you're in this for a long period of time, the impact on your ability to lead your team in a positive way, and the impact on all the other team members, and the potential of, I don't know, just the negativity and the discomfort and all the stuff that happens that's going to take the whole team's attention and awareness away from what they're trying to achieve, and puts it over here on this performance issue, which, hopefully the performance issue, I mean, let's cross our fingers that the performance issue is kind of handled just between the manager and the team member, but it's kind of never really like that, right? Because that team member's performance affects everything else.
Right. Exactly. Right? I agree. I've seen some performance management last as long as 6 months. That's very, very rare.
Okay, good.
That's very rare. And I'm speaking also particularly in the private sector, but I would say, again, anywhere from 60, 90 days max is what I typically have seen. Because the longer it goes on, Claire, the more painful it is for everybody.
Right.
Manager, the employee, and the team.
How often, Theresa, do you see things that start creeping up here? How often do you see this really turn around and this person like really, really fix their performance and come on back?
I have seen quite a bit of times when the employee gets it, or whatever the issue was, has been resolved, and the employee has turned the performance around. Good. I have seen it. I have seen it where it's been positive. And then sometimes I've seen it where the employee does, resign. They do leave. But I have seen this turn an employee's performance around. So it doesn't always, but I have seen it work.
Yeah. And just, we have to acknowledge this is not a one-way show. Like sometimes I think more often than not, it's just probably there's something about the fit that's not right. It could be the person's not the right fit for the role, or they're not the right fit for the team culture or something, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I found that when typically when an employee resigns, it was not a good fit for that person. And they decide
later
to
they're
leave.
Thankful. They're like, I should have gotten out of there a lot earlier.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yes. Just because you have a job and a role in a place doesn't mean that it's, I know that's been my story at least once.
I agree. Yes.
And then I look back on it years later and I think, oh my gosh. I mean, I think one of the reasons this appeals to me so much and why I'm passionate about it is because I know that I have been an underperforming employee, and I worked for people who were very kind and caring. But it wasn't a good fit. That was part of it. And the other part of it was that I wasn't supported in building the skills I needed to do the job. And I guess another part of it would be that my manager was a wonderful, lovely human being. But she also just needed to learn a little more about how to do this coaching and how to address these things around down low here on clarity and coaching and guidance. And this stuff wasn't happening.
Absolutely. I also, Claire, I've worked with a manager, especially when the manager was a new manager, and she would constantly cancel our one-on-ones. Performance reviews were delivered late. There was a whole host of number of things. And we as a team suffered because, the manager wasn't in a good place. I've also been the recipient of when there's been a reorganization, I'm placed into a role where this really wasn't a good fit for me. So I've had to work through that. And then until I could get to the role that was a better fit for me. So those things happen too.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a lot of that happen. Like I saw a lot of that in education, where people would be reassigned to whole different jobs and roles and departments. And I mean, I was always like, how does that fit? How does that person go from over there to over here? I don't know. And anyway, sometimes it would work and sometimes it wouldn't, but in any case.
That's right.
Yeah. So so really what I'm taking from this, Theresa, is, I'm so hopeful about what you said, 60 to 90 days.
Yes.
To me, that's far more doable. It's a time that I can focus and really be helpful, really do your work down here, really do your work around clarity and coaching.
Yes.
Get HR involved if things don't seem to be kind of turning around. And sufficient and sustained. I love what you said there, sufficient and sustained. And that usually, right, so your organization is going to have a process for you to follow up above this gold line. Once the
Mhm.
corrective action begins, make sure that you're following process.
Correct. And that 60 to 90 days is really dependent on how much coaching the manager has had prior to moving forward to formal performance management
Absolutely.
and documentation, of course. Because
Yeah.
if the documentation is there, they start back at square one.
Yeah. Okay,
Mhm.
let's dig in a little bit more to documentation. So I think we've really done a pretty good job here of explaining the process in general. And again, it's this where when you get to this gold line, right? The better work you do down here around clarity of expectations, the clearer it's going to be about when you're getting close to this line, right? Because you've been clear about what's expected, so you know how to measure. I just think that that's a big thing that a lot of people don't know how to measure. So
Correct.
okay.
Correct.
Okay, so let's talk about documenting patterns and specifics.
Right.
Tell us about what's here.
Yes. Okay. So generally feedback a manager receives typically falls into one of three buckets. General conclusions we want.
Okay.
The manager's hearing the
You're a poor
employee is
communicator, right? Yeah.
poor communicator. That's right. Poor communicator. Well, then, what is a specific example? The employee had an argument with a coworker last week, or
Okay.
the employee was, short or tense with an employee, something like that.
Okay.
But the pattern behavior, this bucket in the middle,
Right.
really is what the manager would focus on to when you look at identifying whatever that pattern is,
Yeah.
and then looking at the behavior.
Okay.
The employee reacts defensively or denies ownership, blames others.
Right.
So again, general conclusions here on the left, another one. This person intimidates people.
Yeah.
Poor team player. Okay, so the peers are reluctant to work with him. What does that mean? What's the pattern of behavior? Well, you have an intimidating tone, or your word choice, or your invasion of personal space. You don't give a person personal space. So these are things that, as a manager is writing the performance improvement plan, that he or she would look at the general conclusions, the specific examples of what the employees are looking for and is needed, but the pattern of behavior so that the employee will understand, oh, it's these patterns, this behavior is what needs to be addressed. Then, of course, there's the other one of poor quality, technically weak. The example here is that the person's writing code that has a lot of errors. What's the pattern of behavior? You have more errors as opposed to your peers, or you're not contributing to the project as your peers. So this really helps the manager to be clear, not just saying you intimidate people, but giving examples is what the employee needs, but also the pattern of behavior is what you will document in your performance improvement plan or your probation letter. And remember to being clear, kind, and consistent is what is going to drive the message home.
Yes. Okay. So I think this is great because a lot of people will, these general conclusions, to me, this sounds like the impression, right? This is where I go like, okay, I have this impression you intimidate people. You're a poor team player, you've got poor communication, et cetera, et cetera. So this is my impression. So I start there, and then I have to do my homework and say, do I have specific examples of this? What is the actual behavior that I'm seeing, or that is being observed? And then how can we write this into a support plan? So if, for example, I just look at this and I think, okay, this is my area, right? If somebody's a poor communicator and they're having an argument, I go like, okay, let me go and support you. Can I support you in what happened last week and help you get better? But overall, I'm seeing that actually there's patterns of behavior here. I see you frequently reacting defensively. I see you frequently denying ownership by using these phrases, for example. It wasn't my fault. I wasn't, I didn't do it first, et cetera, right? So I'm documenting specific things, but then I'm saying, let me coach you around how to receive feedback without being defensive. Let me coach you about how to take ownership of your part of the issue, right?
Right.
Let me coach you about how to solve a problem instead of seeking blame.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So general conclusions to specific examples, and then looking at, is this a pattern of behavior that I can actually document in a sense that I can actually point to?
Absolutely. And looking at the last one, poor quality and technically weak, you're writing
Yeah,
code that has a lot of errors in it. You know,
yeah,
making sure the manager, when the manager writes that performance improvement plan or the
yeah,
performance warning, you know, writing it in a SMART goal, you know, being
yeah,
specific,
yeah,
measurable, you know, attainable or
yeah.
accountable, relevant and time bound. So the
Love
manager would put in this performance improvement plan that when you write code, I need for you to, you know, double check it. I need for you to make sure that you're following whatever the guidelines are when you write code.
Yeah,
So that it's not just the person did an activity, they worked on a report, but
right,
what did they do? They
right,
double checked all the coding.
right.
They also did a first draft that was ready for me to review at a certain date.
Yes,
Also, it could be that, well, I'm a poor communicator. Well, I'm not, the person's not following up on email. An activity would be, you know,
right.
I answered 3 emails, but what
Yeah,
did you do? I received 5 different issues. I responded to all of the people with directives on how to correct, how I
right,
corrected the error. So
right.
it's specific outcomes. What is the deliverable?
Yes.
What's expected? Something
And when,
tangible.
right. Yeah, and by when, like
And by
next
when?
tomorrow, when you receive emails, you know, this kind of thing, right?
Right, right,
Okay, I love it.
right.
I think that's really, really important. All right, let's go into doing a few more tips for proper documentation. I can't wait. Can't wait to hear
Okay.
these. All right, don't do what? Oh, this is good. Okay, let's
Don't
go.
debate,
Yeah.
right. Don't debate over the validity of the feedback. You know, when
When
writing the
somebody
feedback.
when
Don't,
somebody says that's not true or this or that, okay,
correct. Don't be defensive.
yeah,
Don't be
just say
defensive.
this is the feedback that I've gotten and we need to discuss it.
Correct.
Don't debate
Correct.
it. All right.
Don't debate it. Don't be
I could
defensive.
I could totally see that somebody coming in, they're like, this, you know, it's just because so and so doesn't like me, and then you kind of go down that rabbit hole, right? Oh, okay, well,
Absolutely.
let's talk about
Absolutely.
that now, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just and feedback, you know, really is, they may not see it as a gift, but feedback is really a gift.
Yeah,
And I don't remember the report I saw that was cited a couple of years ago that even if an employee receives negative feedback, they rather receive feedback than not. That's
yeah,
why having those conversations ongoing in one-on-ones, and then when the performance starts to turn, having those coaching conversations is so important,
yeah.
critical.
Coaching,
You know,
coaching, coaching. Absolutely.
absolutely. Don't apologize for having performance feedback
Oh,
to
I'm
give.
sorry. I'm sorry to share this with you, but
Exactly. Or I haven't seen this, but others have, or don't apologize. You have the
right,
responsibility as a manager to give the performance feedback. Again, that's part of the job.
right. Ooh, that can take a lot of courage, but
It
right.
can.
Yeah,
It can. And in that case, I've also recommended to practice. Practice with HR.
yeah,
Practice with another peer manager.
yeah.
So that when you walk into, you know, the room or you have that conversation, or if it's over Zoom, whenever it is, that you are ready and that you can stand in what you need to do.
I love it. Okay, don't apologize.
Right.
Don't rescue. What does that mean, Theresa? How would I rescue the employee?
You know, I know that you've taken a while to understand the project or what's expected. And, you know, I know you're doing the best that you can.
Yeah,
We're going to have this workout. You know,
yeah.
trying those things to undermine the feedback you have to give to the employee. You know, don't rescue the employee. You need to give the feedback. You need to be consistent, clear, and kind,
Yeah.
but don't rescue the employee.
Okay, so this is interesting because I think what I heard you just say, you know, like I know this is going to work out or this or that, right? Like, I think there's this way that we need to be clear and direct in our feedback and let it land,
Mhm,
right?
mhm.
And what do you think about this, Theresa? Because I would advise people so often, I would say, let it land.
Mhm,
It's okay for us all to be uncomfortable for a minute.
mhm.
And then continue the conversation about how it's going to get better and specifically what you're looking for, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
But at the end, I mean, not always, but
Mhm.
especially at first, and especially when you're in that coaching stage,
Yes.
to reinforce the confidence you have that they can do it.
Yes.
Does that make
That's-
sense?
That makes sense. It's really important. Always, I have always told managers to please when you end the conversation, I'm here to help you be successful.
Yes.
I'm here to help, and with anything I can do,
Yeah.
please let me know if there's anything I can do to
Yeah.
help you to move through this and
Yeah.
to be successful.
Right.
Because
Right.
some of the things may be uncomfortable that,
Yeah.
that you're hearing.
Yeah.
Hopefully you haven't heard this for the first time, or maybe it's, you're internalizing it differently this first time, but I
Yeah.
am here as a resource. I'll
Yeah.
continue to be a resource for you.
Yeah.
I'm here to help you to work through and to be successful.
Yeah.
That's my goal.
Okay. I like that. I like that. And I like, I just think it's important to reinforce this idea of not, you can demonstrate that you have confidence in them, but that when you have to have an uncomfortable conversation, you don't want to squirrel out of the discomfort too quickly, right? It's okay.
Right. It's
But
okay.
sometimes that discomfort can actually work in your favor, because the employee at some point has to really understand that this is a serious conversation that we need to have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is serious. And
Yeah.
sometime put a pause in the conversation.
Yeah.
Just pause and be comfortable with stillness.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
You may be anxious inside as a manager, but it's okay just to stop and pause.
Yeah. Now, this is something that I know a lot of leaders and managers need to practice. I certainly need to, I'm always practicing that. I think that's always really important. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't be general or indirect. I think we've talked about that a lot, but yes. What is indirect?
Yes.
What does indirect sound like?
The team was looking for this. You gave some of the information, but no, they didn't deliver what they were supposed to deliver.
Right.
So not being indirect, be direct, call it out.
Yeah.
Don't go, around the side.
Don't dance around it. Right.
Yeah. Don't dance around it. Just be direct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then
don't
finally, don't make judgmental remarks.
Yes. Don't make judgmental remarks to the employee. You always do this, or you should have known better, or why did you do that? Do not make judgmental remarks.
Yeah.
Just don't go there.
Right.
That's not what your role is.
Right.
Being specific and
dragging
clear.
the team down. You're this or that. Like, no need to amplify these things. No need to add fuel to the fire. Just be direct.
Just exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we've got I've got a couple questions, and I know we're going to go. We got a couple more slides here to go through, but right here, I just want to ask, like, when you're doing this, do you ever hear of employees like filing a grievance or something when this kind of thing starts happening, or going on a leave of absence when
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
Claire, that's an excellent question. I have had people file a grievance, or they file a complaint of harassment or retaliation.
Yes.
And when that happens, the company needs to follow their protocol and, investigate.
Yeah.
Does the manager continue to manage the performance? Yes. Does the manager continue to document? Yes. Is it disruptive to the manager? Yes. It can be intimidating. Yes. But that's the time where the manager just has to breathe and, double down on what their role is, and that is managing the performance. And investigations do take place. I've actually been a part of many that have taken place when an individual is going through performance management and raise allegations. The company has an obligation to investigate, and the investigation continues on even while the performance management is taking place.
Yeah.
And then you asked me another question about
leave of absence.
Leave of absence, that happens too. And when a person goes on leave of absence, the performance improvement plan, stops. It just takes a pause while the person's out. It's on hold. It's on hold.
So then if they come back, let's say that the performance improvement plan is sort of related to their work on a specific kind of a project.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they take a leave of absence, the performance improvement plan goes on hold. By the time they come back, the project's over.
Yes.
Then what happens?
And that has happened. At that point, it could possibly be a restart if the project is over and that is ended.
You got to work with HR on that, I guess.
Have to work with HR. have to work with HR.
Figure
Yeah,
out what to do. Yeah.
correct. Or someone may have taken on that piece of work while that person's gone.
Yeah.
And then that work is given back to the employee when the employee returns.
Okay.
Again, working with HR to see how you engage.
What's our
moving
strategy here? Okay.
Correct.
But
What's
it
the
doesn't
strategy?
just disappear.
Nope, it does not just disappear. Because
Okay.
the performance improvement plan, once that formal document has been created and delivered, that is a permanent part of the person's personnel file.
Okay.
And if the employee no longer works on that project or something changes, that would also be part of their performance review, yearly performance review, that they were on this performance improvement plan during this time.
Yeah.
That's important to capture that. It doesn't go away.
Right. It needs some resolution.
Correct.
Yeah. It
Correct.
doesn't just disappear. Okay.
Correct.
Okay, very good. All right, let's go on back here. Okay, so you're talking about your performance improvement meetings now specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So not just the performance, but you go into the meeting and you have an actual conversation about it, and that's this kind of defined time period.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So
and
the
meeting notes.
things you got to make sure are there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Making sure these things are here. And one of the questions that does come up from managers is, I get the question, do I have to have multiple copies of my notes regarding every conversation with the employee?
Yeah.
And you don't have to have multiple copies. One copy is enough that is documented.
Yeah.
Just document it and keep the conversation.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that's important. So you got to have your date, your time, the location, right? This is where we met, when we met, et cetera. Who was there, who was in the room. Okay, let me ask you about that, because, recently one of our clients was saying, oh, you always have to have a third party in the room, almost for any employee conversation. I thought that was a little extreme, but, but for these, is it recommended to have others present in the room for these conversations? What is your thought on that?
My thought is certainly in the private sector, you didn't have a second person. In public sector, I don't feel it's necessary.
Okay.
I don't always recommend it. It can be disruptive unless the third person who's there. And when I say the third person, if it's a union environment, does the MOU allow it? Does the MOU allow for a person, shop steward or something like that, to be in the meeting? Then you just follow whatever the MOU says and the decision is made.
Okay.
But normally I don't have a third person in the room.
Okay.
Or I don't advise the manager to have a third person in the room. It can be intimidating. It can be distracting. And so unless the MOU calls for it, then it's just a conversation between the manager and the employee.
Okay. Yeah, because I always think about that, like how awkward would it be to just have some like shadow lurking in the corner taking notes,
Exactly, exactly.
Like a little odd. And I think it would put everybody on edge, but I'm sure there are times when it's important. So again, checking in with HR, talking that through, especially the union environment. Okay, what did we talk about, right? Here's the issues we discussed. Okay, now, when you say describe the employee's response and disposition, this is where I feel like it could get a little dicey because, right, we just talked about don't be judgmental, don't write things down like, this is all discoverable, right? If in an investigation, everything you're writing down, this is all discoverable.
Right. And I would put this in my separate manager's note just to make a note to myself. It is discoverable. Did the employee cry? Did the employee cry? Did the employee scream? Did they shout? Did they bang on the table? Just little notes, a few little notes, just so you have what did you observe? What happened? Did the employee slump in their chair? That's not part of the PIP.
Okay.
Not part of the documentation, just some handwritten notes that the manager would keep. What happened in the meeting? What was the person? What was the reaction?
Yeah. Okay. I want to really emphasize this observable behavior bit. Right. Not so I wouldn't say employee was uncooperative.
Right.
But I might say employee crossed their arms and didn't answer questions.
Right. Observable behaviors. That's what the
observable behaviors.
Right.
And I always want to say to people, this is what a surveillance camera would capture.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So think about it from the camera viewpoint in a sense. That is how you know whether it's quote observable. If you were just watching this on a screen, would you be able to describe what was happening? Employee sat back in their chair, crossed their arms, and I asked 3 consecutive questions with 0 response.
Correct.
Okay. Okay. Something like that. Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's an excellent way to put it. I think that's an excellent way to put it, Claire, and that is a camera view. What would a camera capture?
Yeah. I often, I used to do a bit of training in interviewing and selecting team members and sort of bringing people on board. And I think this was a really, really important part of how like a panel would describe what was happening in the interview process without adding too much of their own filters. You know, it's so important.
Yes.
Okay, so you really want to make sure that this is documented and set into your file that is specific for this issue.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, following up and following through, right? So important, because once you start this as a manager, you want to make sure that you're doing your part to support performance and to support the change and to get the person back on board. That is the whole point.
Right. Get them back on board.
Okay.
Right. Following through on any commitments, whatever you told the employee you will do and what the employee should do, capturing that, deliver on your action items as you promised.
So important.
Yeah. Provide a summary of the issues and expectations, email, or in this case, a performance improvement plan, or, probation level, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You're never at a disadvantage if you document.
Yes.
You're never at a disadvantage if you document.
Okay, good.
Be clear, respond in a timely manner to questions, ask for help, or any other emerging issues that happen.
Yeah.
Making sure you respond in a timely manner.
Okay. Yeah, like more frequent is better, right? I mean, like, and not just frequent, but I mean, you're saying respond in a timely manner. We had the meeting today at 2. I sent you a summary by 5.
Correct. And then having it when the employee knows when you're meeting next. Put it on your calendar. Yeah. Put it on their calendar. It's not an invite. We will meet again next Friday at 10 a.m.
Yeah, got it.
So it's on the calendar. Again, being clear about and ask the employee if they understand what the expectations are.
Yeah.
Have them repeat it.
Yeah.
Making sure the employee knows and can answer the questions. What does the employee need to do to move forward? Yeah. Okay? And then manager, how will you track it? Yeah. What's an easy, painless way to track and collect the feedback? I have a small, not a small, but I have it's a performance tracker. And so that can be used. The date you meet the employee, the time, what you talked about, what was the outcome? And you can track it that way.
Okay, we need to get that out to people. I think that would be great if you could share that. That'd be lovely.
Absolutely. Okay. And then again, there's no substitute for a time commitment to the employee. Deliver on your commitment. Again, mark it in your calendar. Yeah. Monitor the feedback. Yeah. Formally meet and review the status on a regular basis. Yeah. Weekly. I always recommend weekly. Mark it on your calendar so the employee knows we're meeting next week. I need to have these things delivered before that time. And
all the same guidelines persist, right? You get into that meeting 1 week from today, and you need to be clear and have observable behaviors and everything else, right? It's not like, oh, I had this one hard conversation and then everything should get easier from there necessarily. Hopefully it will. Wouldn't that be great?
Right.
Right.
Right. And the employee is looking for the manager's consistency. Are they gonna look at, is the manager going to just say it once and that's it? Right. The employee's looking to see what you're going to do. So that's why it's important to have that clear expectations, feedback, follow up. Yep. Next week, we're going to talk about this. This is what I expect from you from next week. The employee is looking for that. And a lot of times it's what they need.
Cannot emphasize enough. Clear, kind, consistent. Clear, kind, consistent, right?
Correct.
I love it.
Correct.
Okay. Well, we thank you so much, Theresa. I mean, this has been lovely. I really feel that this is such an important topic. People struggle so much with this. Yeah. And I think some of the struggle is really linked to, this is going to take a lot of time for me. It's kind of vague, you know, this is not going well, but I don't know exactly how to address it, et cetera. And I think it's really important to just come back and say, okay, first things first, let me make sure that expectations are clear. Yes. Let me get really clear on what I'm expecting, and let's have that conversation. And then let's make a plan for checking in. and let's
Correct.
coach that employee as much as we can. And then let's look for sustained and sufficient improvement.
Correct.
Okay, I love it.
Correct.
Very good.
Correct. And when the employee knows, if you follow that, the employee will say, okay, this manager's giving me, a fair shake, but
Yeah.
I know what to expect. Then it's
Yes,
up to the employee to meet those expectations.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Well, I want to
Right.
thank you so much, Theresa. That was just lovely. I really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you,
And
Claire.
we're going to take a few minutes for a couple of questions. If
Okay.
anybody's got questions, we'll open it up to the floor, but I didn't want this time to go by without me saying thank you, thank you. Your time
Oh,
is so
thank
wonderful
you.
and love your expertise. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Claire. Thank you.
all right, let's invite anyone to come on board and ask some questions. You can put questions in the chat or show us your beautiful face. There you are.
Hi, Claire and Theresa. I wanted to just a couple things. I wanted to echo Theresa, what you said earlier about setting expectations early with staff. I'll just share a quick story. When I became the clerk of the board at El Dorado, I knew it was a tumultuous environment. There was a lot of, they were not productive. And the very first thing I did was write a 1-page, here's what I want to do. And here's what we're going to do together. And it was easier later when there were discipline issues, and they were very small and minor, but everyone knew, hey, if you're going to be late to work 4 days out of 5, Jim's going to talk to you.
Yeah.
So I echo that, and it was like, oh yeah, I feel like I did that well, and it worked. It was so much easier later.
Yeah.
Is the
Right.
message there. And the other thing I thought was really great. I love that graphic about the manager's response to the performance issues. I think people, even really seasoned managers and coaches, do those things. They mimic that, but being able to see it and visualize it. And I think it might be important to share that with my team, direct reports, and even other managers who are peers, so they can show, we can share that. It doesn't have to be a secret. Employee, if you're reaching that vertical
A
bar,
gold bar. Yeah.
it shouldn't be a surprise, number one. And the manager can that's a tool to say, hey, you're getting there. What can we do to really help? And I echo that after that bar, the stuff that comes after that is when the manager has to work even harder to try to protect that person and encourage them. And hey, maybe they aren't a good fit, and they can arrive at that conclusion on their own.
Right. Absolutely. Right.
So this has been extremely helpful. I'm working on just some general things about organizational development, and that's why I wanted to participate in this today. I want to, I don't know if it's a question, maybe it's your thoughts for Theresa and Claire, either one of you, or anybody who's also participating, on performance measurement in terms of a programmatic approach to improve a culture. That affects the entire organization. Not saying my organization does. I've worked for Yuba Water, you can see that, but there's a shift in the culture, and it's a good one. But there's also managing the performance of the performance management tool. You understand what I mean? Any experience, and I don't know if anyone's ever really implemented an entire performance measurement program at that level. It's usually left to HR and an administrative manager or something, but it's almost something that in my mind, you kind of need everybody to participate in from the beginning and understand why it exists, to make these conversations, they'll never be easy ever, but more palatable as we go through them. So just wanted to get your thoughts, and I can repeat any of that.
Yeah. So Jim, are you meaning like what I'm hearing you say is, for example, shifting over to a culture where we are going to have quarterly coaching conversations?
Yeah, exactly. And we have started some of those here, where we have employees have business plans that are based on the overall large scope strategic plan. And there are quarterly and annual coaching sessions, and we're in their infancy in that. So there's some learning process, and that might be where my question's coming is, Theresa, years in the HR world. What are your guys' thoughts on where challenges might be? What can we put documentation wise that would help people have resources to go go back to those things. Hey, I'm really struggling with this. What was in my documentation? Any thoughts on those?
I would say I'm hearing a couple things, Jim, and one
Yeah.
is it sounds like looking at a best practices or playbook, maybe. Certainly, and I know that there are other companies that are rolling out this quarterly performance review. And but the pieces that need to be included are having those performance coaching conversations on a regular basis. And again, I agree with you. The performance review, whether it's quarterly or annually, most of the time, should not be a surprise. Even when the manager gets that gold bar, that shouldn't be a surprise to the employee because the manager would have coached them along.
Yeah.
But I think that looking at a playbook or best practices or another, we'll get into this a lot with the performance management at the end of the month. But again, playbook, conversations, training, ongoing, mentoring, ongoing. Especially for new managers, I've never had a performance issue or had to deal with it, that they can have someone to partner with or someone who's more seasoned to this is how this looks. This is what this looks like. I've had this conversation. And then role playing with that person, I think really when they're in there and they see it is the most powerful teaching tool.
Yeah.
I also love the idea too, as you just talked about, kind of a principles that you develop for your team. It solves a lot of problems down the line. Really helps.
Yeah, that was an effort to set the tone.
Sure.
So great. So important. What a great step. I think too, Jim, let me just speak to that idea of moving the culture. Because when you're moving the culture toward any new habit you're trying to help people, there's a whole process around that, around introducing the new habit, getting people skilled up, and then implementing that into the way we do things. And that usually requires some measurement and some metrics and somebody paying attention to say like, okay, we said we were going to have quarterly coaching conversations. Out of the 20 people in front of me, how many people have done it? And how do I know that you've done it? And that's why we recommend that people are documenting those coaching conversations and submitting them, not because we're trying to have a record of everyone's performance, but because we're trying to help people make sure that they are having regular conversations and they're getting on board with the process of quarterly coaching.
Yeah.
So there's that investment, but just like any other thing that you're trying to create, whether it's utilizing the new, time system or, whether it's, doing this new or that new, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. In order to get everybody on board, we have to have dedicated effort to that. And we actually have some time set aside in one of our coaching classes for that.
Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's great. That's very helpful. We're in a good place. I think it's just some practice.
Totally.
Yeah.
Bringing everybody, the train's moving and it's not always easy to get them all on, or you can use herding the cats. That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's got, it's
so
a
many
new thing.
So many metaphors that apply.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you. I'm grateful for your time today, for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Other questions? No? All right. All right. Well, let's wrap it up here. Thank you all so much for being here. Really, really appreciate you. And especially you, Theresa. Thank you for giving your time and attention to this really, really, really important topic. We're excited about this. We're going to make some of those support documents available for people, and we will see everyone in class very, very soon.
Yes, that's right.
Great. Next week.
Okay.
Thanks
Thank
so
you.
much, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.